21 million barrels. That is the daily volume of crude oil that once flowed through a narrow ribbon of water only 21 miles wide. A corridor so vital that its sudden closure in March of 2026 stranded 3,200 ships and sent the world's energy markets into convulsions within hours. Oil tankers sat idle, the flow of global trade snapped, and for a moment, the lights of entire cities flickered with uncertainty. This was not a hypothetical scenario, nor a distant what if. It was the nightmare that every energy minister, every strategist, every shipping executive had quietly feared for decades. Iran finally closed the Strait of Hormuz. The world learned in real time what it means for a single bottleneck to become a chokehold on civilization. What had taken centuries to build, a system of energy, commerce, and alliances, was suddenly at the mercy of one nation's decision. But in the shadows of this chaos, another story was already in motion. A story not of destruction, but of audacious engineering and geostrategic calculation. As Iran played its ultimate card, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates unveiled a countermove that had been decades in the making. A plan to literally cut through mountains, to redraw the very map of the Gulf, and to erase the Strait of Hormuz as a weapon forever. What would it take to build a canal capable of bypassing the world's most dangerous choke point? And what would happen to Iran when its trump card turned to dust? If questions like this one are the kind you find yourself turning over long after the story ends, you are exactly the audience this work is made for. Subscribing takes 1 second, and it means the next chapter finds you. And when the story is done, leave a thought in the comments. The conversation there is often the most interesting part. Before the world's attention was seized by gridlocked tankers and spiking oil prices, there had been a prevailing certainty in diplomatic circles. The Strait of Hormuz may be narrow, but it was unshakable. For nearly half a century, every calculation, military, economic, political, was anchored in the belief that Iran's threat to close the strait would remain just that, a threat. The geography itself seemed to guarantee it. The Musandam Peninsula, an Omani finger jutting north, left only a sliver of land between the Persian Gulf and the open sea. The terrain was daunting, the engineering challenges immense. Talk of digging a canal through stone and mountain was dismissed as fantasy. Even as tensions flared and tankers exploded in the night, the consensus held. The world had no plan B, because building one was deemed impossible. That confidence was about to be tested in a way none of them had planned for. When Iran moved from words to action, the magnitude of the world's overconfidence became painfully clear. The first signs of unraveling came not with a bang, but with the slow, grinding halt of commerce. At 4:17 a.m. on March 4th, as dawn broke over the Gulf, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards declared the Strait of Hormuz closed. Within minutes, patrol boats and mines made good on the threat. By noon, 21 confirmed attacks on commercial vessels sent insurance premiums soaring and forced captains to anchor in place. 5 crew members were killed before the first day was over. On March 10th, Aramco CEO announced the activation of the Petroline pipeline, and suddenly the invisible chessboard of the Gulf shifted. Saudi Arabia's pipeline, 1,200 kilometers of steel buried beneath the desert, came online at full capacity, a move dismissed for decades as unnecessary. Now, it was the only artery still pumping. In the chaos, the UAE accelerated operations at the port of Horfakan, integrating new piers and pipelines in record time. The bypass network, once a backup, became the lifeline. What came next would prove that everything the analysts had assumed about the situation was built on a foundation that was already crumbling. By 0600 on March 12th, the numbers were in. 20 million barrels per day frozen. Brent crude surged from $65 to $104. An estimated 400 ships gridlocked outside the strait. China, the world's largest oil importer, watched as nearly half its supply evaporated overnight. State-owned shipping giant COSCO suspended all bookings to the Middle East, and 250 of its vessels sat idle, unable to move. On March 13th, shrapnel struck a Chinese ship that had risked the passage, proof that even friendly signals no longer guaranteed safety. Beijing's patience snapped. In an unprecedented move, China's foreign ministry condemned the attacks and, in a quiet but unmistakable shift, refused to defend Iran at the United Nations. For the first time, Iran found itself without the shield of its most powerful ally. Meanwhile, the Gulf states moved with a clarity born of necessity. The focus shifted to two audacious engineering projects. One, a canal through the Musandam Peninsula, just 20 to 50 kilometers in length, but requiring a passage through 2,000-meter limestone peaks, rock so hard it would take 40 to 60 times the labor of the Panama Canal. Estimated cost, $200 to $300 billion. The alternative? A 950-kilometer cut through the empty quarter, the Rub al-Khali Desert, a route longer but flatter with its own challenges of elevation and water loss. Both projects, once shelved as too expensive or too disruptive, were now back in play. Every day the strait remained closed, the logic of bypassing it grew stronger. At 8 p.m. on March 14th, the number of vessels passing through the Strait of Hormuz fell to 0, a first in recorded history. Inside Iran, the government's facade cracked. The foreign minister declared a willingness to negotiate. The military brass refused. Supreme Leader Mujtaba Khamenei, wounded in an airstrike, was flown to Moscow for treatment. The chain of command shattered. On the ground, soldiers deserted their posts. The Artesh and IRGC, the regular army and the Revolutionary Guards, turned on each other. Power was fracturing not just between state and people, but within the state itself. As the world watched, the U.S.-led coalition began the slow, dangerous process of mine clearing in the strait. A-10 Warthogs flew low, destroying coastal missile batteries. Apaches hunted fast boats. Ukrainian drone operators, with a 96% success rate, protected Gulf ports from the waves of Iranian Shahed drones. The bypass infrastructure, pipelines to the Red Sea, the Fujairah port, the Horfakan terminal proved their worth. But the gap remained. 11 million barrels per day were still unaccounted for. The only way to close it was to physically cut a new path to the sea. The trap had been set weeks earlier. Iran believed it could wield the strait as a weapon and force the world to its knees. Instead, it forced its neighbors to reinvent their geography. That single decision set off a chain of events that most observers still have not fully mapped, and the consequences are still unfolding today. The breaking point arrived with a paradox. Iran's ultimate weapon, once triggered, destroyed not its enemies, but itself. Oil revenues, the regime's lifeblood, collapsed by 90%. Inflation soared. Foreign exchange reserves dwindled. The rial lost half its value in a month. Iranian tankers, once feared, now required U.S. permission to leave port. The threat that was meant to be a nuclear option became a suicide note. China, once a silent partner, turned to Saudi and Emirati pipelines for its needs. Russia, insulated by its own supplies, watched as the closure of Hormuz strengthened its hand in energy negotiations with Beijing. The U.S., producing the bulk of its own oil, was shaken but not crippled. The asymmetry was stark. Iran had burned its own house down and found no one left to put out the fire. The full accounting is brutal. Over 100 Iranian vessels sunk or damaged. The Artesh in open mutiny. The IRGC planning blockades of its own government's ministries. 3 possible scenarios flickered in the intelligence briefings of every major capital. A Revolutionary Guards coup, a diplomatic surrender that triggers civil war, or a complete state collapse, unleashing ethnic and regional fractures that had been held at bay for decades. The UNHCR's March 13th report estimated 3.2 million displaced Iranians, hundreds of thousands approaching the borders with Turkey and Azerbaijan. In Ankara, plans were activated for a 380-kilometer border wall, buffer zones, and EU funding requests. A playbook written in the harsh lessons of Syria's refugee crisis. What was lost is measurable, but what was prevented is just as significant. The pipelines built in the 1980s as insurance suddenly became the difference between global catastrophe and mere crisis. Oil above $100, but not $200. Factories in China and Japan slowed, but did not stop. The world was shaken, but did not collapse. The bypass infrastructure, once scorned as wasteful, became the backbone of global stability. Yet the equation remains incomplete. Iraq, Kuwait, and Qatar lack bypass pipelines. Their exports are still hostage to the Strait. Qatar's LNG, 25% of global supply, remains largely halted. The pipelines, ports, and buffer routes are not enough to cover all lost volumes. And the Red Sea route, while a lifeline, is now threatened by Houthi drones and regional instability. The lesson is clear. No single solution can replace a choke point as vital as Hormuz. Only a distributed, redundant network can insulate the world from blackmail. The resonance of these events reaches far beyond oil or even the Gulf. The engineering revolution underway, the carving of canals, the laying of pipelines beneath desert and mountain, signals a new era of geoengineering wars. States now seek to neutralize their enemies, not by fighting over ground, but by altering the ground itself. A canal through Musandam, or the Empty Quarter, would render Iran's entire investment in fast boats, mines, and coastal missiles obsolete. The geography that once gave Tehran leverage now becomes a liability, a relic weapon in a world that has moved beyond it. As the dust settles, a deeper principle emerges. The story of the Strait of Hormuz is not just about oil, nor even about power. It is about the dangers of over-reliance on geography, on threats, on a single card held too long. It is about the quiet, patient work of those who build alternatives in the shadows, waiting for the day when the unthinkable becomes inevitable. The Gulf states did not defeat Iran in open battle. They did something more permanent. They made Iran's primary weapon meaningless. The question worth sitting with is not whether this outcome was inevitable, but whether any actor, military, political, or corporate, can afford to bet the future on a single point of failure. Share what you think in the comments. Where does strategic foresight end and overconfidence begin? And as the world redraws its maps, who will be the next to find their leverage erased by someone else's patience?